all of it. She said they were taking samples of the sand to see if they could figure out why the fish were dying. She also remembered being called Lady of the Sands, but she had no idea what that meant. Bud then read her Dan's letter that said he would be coming for her, and on October 15th, in broad daylight, Dan grabbed her and shoved her into his car. This time he was alone, and he was out of his mind. Dan drove for a while and then pulled the car over. He whispered to Linda, "Come here, half-breed," then kissed her all over his face.
Ugh, this guy.
Yeah, he's gross. They kept driving and periodically he would grab her knee. She would resist and he would say things like, "Oh, you're a tough one." They eventually arrived at a beach house on Long Island. By now, Linda stopped resisting. She figured whatever Dan wanted to happen was just gonna happen, and resisting would just make it worse.
Always resist, ladies.
Yeah, give yourself a fighting chance. Plus, bruises, scratches, and other evidence can help find the perp. Anyway, when they got into the house, Dan kissed her all over her face again. He told her to make herself at home, and he went to the kitchen to make coffee. She looked for a phone. There wasn't one. She looked for some identifying information so she could learn Dan's last name. There was nothing. There were 2 pictures framed. One was of Linda kissing her son Johnny goodbye. The other picture was of Linda by a lighthouse. Dan returned from the kitchen carrying a white, gift-wrapped box. Linda opened it. Inside was a negligee.
Oh no.
Yeah, he told her to put it on. She refused. She could see the anger in Dan's eyes, so Linda offered to put it on over her clothes. Dan agreed. Dan then goes white and says, "Oh my God, it was you." Dan then dropped to his knees and started crying. Linda gently put a hand on his shoulder, and then she bolted for the door and out onto the beach.
Atta girl.
She ran as fast as she could. She could hear Dan screaming behind her, and he was getting closer. Finally, he grabbed her, and instead of hurting her, he started gently rocking her back and forth. He said, "Isn't this nice? We'll go far away and make a new family." Linda said she didn't want a new family. Dan snapped. He shoved Linda's face into the sand and yelled, "Dig more holes, Lady of the Sands." He tried to kiss her. He grabbed at her clothes. Linda screamed for help, but the beach was deserted. Finally, Dan yanked Linda to her feet and said, "Let's clean your face." He dragged her by her hair and shoved her head under the water. Then Linda blacked out.
Imagine like you're an alien species, right? You're an alien species and you are observing. Your job is to just observe and document. And what you're observing and documenting is this one planet of ape people, right? Primate, hominid based Homo sapiens, right? And you're just observing them. And like your alien race, the alien race observing, I'm just gonna speak from them like their perspective most of the time as a default. You understand the things about this whole existing thing that this race of apes don't understand. That is that there's like a whole intricacy of like that's the dynamic between the male and the female sex of any given race, right? And like the female sex is always the one that carries children to term and then births them after a laborious event of, exertion, which is why it's called labor, because it's laborious, that whole process to push it out of their vagina. And so like it's pretty simple. The female gives birth to children, the male puts the child in the female. And that's it. That is it, just from the very base process. Everything else is to be developed and determined by the species themselves. It could be that the female is the one that's the breadwinner and they do all the work and yada yada, or it could be the male. Usually you would think like something like that, you'd want the male to do because the male doesn't have to carry the child and everything else. And so it would make more sense for the male who doesn't have to carry the child to go and do something to like help, or like that's the like just make himself useful, you know? Because all he did was just have to stick his adapter into the socket and feed it his electricity, air quotes, you know? And that's pretty simple and easy to do. And so like it goes without saying, the male is going to try to do something to not even earn his legacy, not even like that, just like he just is just practical, very pragmatic reasoning, very 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 just so pragmatic. It's insane somehow. I don't even, it's like there's no words to describe. It's obvious how that rationale lays itself out. Male, female, super obvious. And so like how does that work? Well, think of it like this. We have like a bifurcated brain, right? And imagine for a moment that the part of the brain that you don't use is actually female. You know, the half of the brain that you don't use, or the most of the brain that you don't use. Think for a moment that's like female, but like the part that you do consciously use is male. So like speaking from like a male perspective, the part of the brain that we don't actively use like consciously, that's female, right? And then like the part of the brain that we men consciously use is obviously male because we are male, right? Super obvious. And then you go to females, and then of course it's the inverse, it's the flip. The part of the brain that they don't use would be male, and the part of the brain that they do use would be female, just like they are. Okay, super simple. And so like what is that exactly? Well, that's quite simple. What that is like a mirror reflection. That is an inverse flip. It's like a mirror reflection of the other. The most simple form of a mirrored image, right? That's what that is. And so like that in a way is what like the whole Garden of Eden, you know, Adam and Eve story was probably trying to, in some deep intrinsic way, communicate, was that like we take parts from one another, and in that way we are like mirrored images of one another. And like this advanced, super high tech, just super everything alien species, all of them, pretty much every single individual in that species understands this in an explicit way. And for that reason, they are able to foster positive relationships with one another and advance their species to unfathomable heights. And as such, they have departed their homeland to now observe and document, and if capable of communicating with the species effectively, perhaps help guide them once they reach a certain Rubicon, a certain point where like they can handle such an event as an alien species introducing themselves to them. Because you got to be a grown up for that, right? You can't be neurotic at all. You can't be a drama queen. You can't be worrying about the wrong type of things. You got to have your head properly on your shoulders, right? Pretty much everybody in your species needs to be on the same page that we are all grown-ups in the room, and that the grown-ups are always in the room, and that the children, whenever it's the grown-ups, time for the grown-ups to be in the room, are not in the same room as the grown-ups. They need to have all their ducks in a row, and they need to have all their stuff sorted out, everything. So that when an alien species arrives on Earth, they don't lose their ever loving mind from just that simple event. Because that shouldn't be that crazy of a thing. You know, it's obvious we're not the only life in the universe. And it's obvious that we are being watched in some manner that we cannot discern. And that these alien entities are taking a hands-off approach to us for a reason. And that reason is that we are by and large not grown up. We're too neurotic. We are too dramatic, and we don't worry about the right things. We worry about things that don't matter, really. We focus on things that don't matter, and things that do matter fall by the wayside. And that is like the opposite of the way that it should be, right? Obviously. And that pattern repeats itself several times throughout our societies. And what is that a facet of? That is a facet of not being grown up. That's what that is. And so, like, why aren't we as a species grown up enough? And the reason why we aren't grown up enough is because our women are not grown up. Men had to be grown up from the get-go. We had to be the breadwinner. We had to go out there into hunting parties where most of us would not survive, hunt down prey. We have to sacrifice ourselves. We have a disposability to us. As they say, women and children always first. All these facets that we accepted as men because we were aware of the situation as us. We do not carry life. We just support it. That's not to say that that's the way that it always should be, but that's how it was for us in the past. And so we came all this way. We dragged our bodies through the mud and dirt and bile and blood and tears and all the sweat of all that labor that we've done, earning our worth in the world as men, so we could support our wives and instill our legacy in our children and continue the human species that little bit more. And then we come across an impasse. Something's blocking our way that we can't see. A glass ceiling, if you will. An invisible barricade. An impassable, invisible wall of some sort. A great filter, if you will. And we just sit there for a while. And at first we don't notice it. And for a lot of the time, I'm speaking from, human-wise now, from like humanity perspective. I switched to humanity perspective in case you weren't aware. We, human species, we take to just ignoring it in a very inconspicuous way that we don't realize that we're doing. Then eventually we get to the point where okay, what is this? What's going on? Why does it feel like we're not moving forward anymore and we're just kind of spinning our wheels in place, And then more and more people become aware of that fact. And they're like, yeah, no, I get it too. It's why does it feel like we haven't advanced really as a species? And our technology is kind of not really advancing. It's getting more refined, I guess. And we can make more powerful, GPU, like graphics cards, and like we can make massive supercomputer farms where like it takes up an entire building, I guess. And like we could do that, and we can make AI, but like the AI is kind of stupid. It's not really effective, and we constantly have to troubleshoot it. But like we can refine it, but it doesn't really advance. There's no like actual leaps. We don't feel like we're making momentum. We're just spinning our wheels in place, and because the reason why we're spinning our wheels in place is because there's a wall in front of us that has us stuck in place. And so like imagine just a car that just came up and bumped itself up against a wall ever so lightly, and now somebody pushed on the gas pedal, and they're just like spinning their wheels in place against the wall. And like people notice that, like, so what's going on with that? And then you realize something hasn't changed. And by something hasn't changed, something hasn't really developed itself. And then they go on for a little bit more, maybe. If they haven't already gone extinct. They haven't already wiped themselves out. Which, by a lot of the time, in our history, speaking humanity-wise, going back in the fossil record, or like just like digging up ancient artifacts, we've done that several times now. So like this is entirely hypothetical. I'm not saying that this is something we've done before as a human species, but I'm saying like if we were able to get to this point, we'd be like, we would realize at some point, like, yeah, something hasn't changed, something hasn't developed, something hasn't happened that needs to happen. And then we do some more diddly daddling about trying to play the fool, and then we turn our heads to our significant others. At this time, I'm speaking from a human male perspective. We turn our heads to the female and be like, what have you done exactly? No, like seriously, what have you done? Because at that point, all the niceties, all the pleasantries, all the mannerisms will have dropped. All the everything would have just dropped to the floor, and nobody will have given a fuck anymore, because we will be in such dire straits that we don't believe we owe that to each other anymore at that point. And so we just drop our predispositions. We like leave our inhibitions at the door, essentially. We remove our filter. And we look at them, we're like, what the fuck is going on with y'all? Women. Why haven't y'all changed? What's going on? And then we realize, oh yeah, no, I get it. Men aren't perfect, far from it. But by and large, we do have something very big on top of women. And that is, we accept our responsibility. We do not run from our responsibility. We are encouraged day in and day out to take up that burden and then take on even more. And if we bitch about it, we need to quit our bitching, and we just need to cowboy up. And fair enough, because that's actually most of the time pretty good advice if you are in such, circumstances for that advice to be valid. But when that advice stops becoming invalid, or starts becoming invalid, then that's the point where I'm talking about, where you have to look around and then you look at the other and you're like, you made me like this because you don't want to change. Why don't you want to change? And at that point, women must give the correct answer. Because at that point, men will have had all their patience exhausted. All of the privileges, all of the niceties, all the pleasantries, all of the politeness that they shared towards women will be gone. And they will hold women in contempt. They will hold women, they will try them in a court of global scale. And they will ask them, what makes you so incapable of growing up? And if they don't have an answer, or if they answer incorrectly, then guess what happens? Collapse. An apocalypse. An extinction level event. And it comes in many forms. That type of thing. Because there's many more ways in which we can fail than we can succeed. That is just the truth of the matter. Women have it in them. This goddess. And this goddess starts out as a feeble, pitiable little girl. A daughter of man. And as daughter of man needs to develop herself. She needs to empower herself in the correct ways. She needs to not abscond from her duty. And what is her duty? Her duty is to grow up and become mother with a capital M. And the way she does that is by growing up. Because a daughter, a girl, which we by and large still refer to women as, if you haven't noticed, I have. We still call women a lot of time girls. That's just something to think about. Just put a pin in that. But they need to grow up into ladies, into women, into mothers. Mother and being with a capital M. Just as we, in the beginning, were father for them and their husband. We were father and husband to them. That is what we became in that hour when we decided to provide for them, to raise them right along with the children we had with them. That's how it was at the beginning, because they were feeble. They were feeble, meek, and weak. And they need to develop themselves to become strong, resilient. And in this growing up process, they would get to the point where they could do away with their old norms. They could get rid of their baggage, the sins of their mothers. They could get rid of that and become mothers with a capital M. Because mother is the name for God on the lips and in the hearts of all children. Not just some, not just most, but all children. And the more time that elapses where women abscond from that duty, the more that's everything around us will rot, decay, and deteriorate into dust, into sand. And then this species that might have been watching or not will come in and survey the land, and they will excavate what they could of our remains to figure out what happened to us. And they will see nothing left of the female, and they will see all the workings of man, but they will see none of the woman. All they will have, all the legacy that woman in and of themselves will have, is the sand that they turned their civilization to. Out of dereliction to their duty to become mother. The derelict lands they left behind will be the legacy of the woman, and the woman will be the woe of man. This lady of the sands. We have been here before. We have been here many times before. At this point, this very point, where women need to change into their final form of a divine feminine that is mother, an all mother, an all mother who is God to the children of which utter her name from their lips and hold her love in their hearts. She needs to become that. Once she does, she, as well as the rest of us, are truly free from the sins of our past, from our original sin, of knowing much more than we know what to do with. And if women do not change, do not develop into their destined role of mother, everything, once again, just like Göbekli Tepe, just like ancient Egypt, just like the lost city of Atlantis, which is real, by the way, 100% real. I've seen it with my own eyes. I spoke with its ghost. Just like many, many attempts before, we will fall into the sands. And then our great watchers will come down, and they will see, oh yes, there she is. And by there she is, I mean there she isn't at all. Our great, not so great Lady of the Sands. The hag child that refused to grow up and damned all of her species because of it.